Hello there, my name is Padmasagara and I'm part of the Ordination team at Padmasagara. And this is a video for all Mitras who've asked for ordination and who might be interested in taking up the Going For Refuge and Prostration Practice. So the Going For Refuge and Prostration Practice is one of the great practices that has been given to us by our teacher and founder, Urgen Sangharachita. And in this practice, we visualize the great refuge tree, the tree of refuge and respect that you can see behind me here. So in the center of the image, you'll be able to see the Buddha Shakyamuni seated on a lotus, which is growing out of a great rainbow-colored cloud in the midst of infinite, vast, deep blue sky. So the Buddha's sat there in the center of this lotus. He's flanked by the Buddha of the past, Dipankara, the Buddha of the future, Maitreya. And there are 4 more lotuses growing out of the central stem. On the lotus closest to us, we have our own teacher, Bhante, Sangharachita, surrounded by his 8 teachers. And to the left here, we have the glorious company of 5 bodhisattvas. On the lotus to the back, an enormous pile of Dharma texts, and on the lotus to the right, 5 of the Buddha's enlightened disciples, 5 arahants. And seated in the sky above the Buddha, we have an array of great teachers from centuries past. So teachers from Japan, from China, from Tibet and from India. And above them, we have the 5 Buddhas of the mandala, the 5 archetypal Buddhas of the mandala. And then right at the summit of the refuge tree, we have Vajrasattva. Not only that, but all around the refuge tree here, we have clouds of gods and goddesses making all different kinds of offerings. So in this practice, we visualize this tree of refuge and respect in our minds, and then we make prostrations repeatedly towards the refuge tree. And at that point, great light pours down, enters into our body, purifies us of all faults of body, speech and mind, and then we sit enjoying the fruits of having been through that whole cosmic drama of enlightenment. So a brief description there of what the practice involves. What I'd like to do in this video is to say a bit more about why I think it's a good idea to take up the Going For Refuge and Prostration Practice if you're a Mitra training for ordination, and also to say something more about the key stages of the practice and the key practical points to bear in mind, but also I'll try to communicate something of the essence of the practice as we go through those stages. So first of all, why might it be a good idea to take up the Going For Refuge and Prostration Practice? Well, these are very uncertain times that we're living in. We're living in an uncertain world. Actually, we're living in an uncertain world all the time. That's the nature of samsara. It is uncertain. But as human beings, we are wired to seek certainty. We are looking for certainty. We're looking for a refuge. The problem we have is that so often we seek certainty, we seek refuge in things that cannot offer that to us. So we're wired to seek certainty, we look in the wrong kind of places, but we can look to something that can offer certainty, that can offer security, and that can offer a refuge. And that, of course, is what the Buddha discovered, which lies beyond birth, old age, sickness, death, and has crystallized in the Buddhist tradition in the image, in the notion of the 3 jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. So going for refuge to the 3 jewels is what really offers us certainty in the midst of an uncertain world. So as Mitras training for ordination, as order members, we need to have a very clear understanding of what going for refuge to the 3 jewels means. We also need to be emotionally engaged with Going for Refuge to the Three Jewels. And really importantly, we need to have a strong volition to actually make that movement, make that transition, that great transformation from going for refuge to false refuges and uncertainty, and to go for refuge instead to the Three Jewels. So we need understanding, we need emotional engagement, we need volition. Now, the Going for Refuge and Prostration practice, I would say, is the ideal practice for us to develop these qualities. The clue is in the name. It's a going for refuge practice. Prostration is a part of that process and a very important part, but primarily we can see this as a going for refuge practice. So I like to call it by its proper name, the Going for Refuge and Prostration practice. So this practice will give you a thorough training, a thorough grounding in what it really means to go for refuge to the Three Jewels, to make that going for refuge less provisional, more effective. So to say something now about the key things to bear in mind if you do want to take up the practice, and as I said before, this will be practical, but I'll also try and communicate a bit more of the essence of the practice too. So let's run through the stages that we encounter when we're doing this practice. So I think the first thing to say is that the foundations for this practice are vital. So at the beginning of doing a session of this practice, we do a period of meditation where we establish mindfulness, awareness, and we cultivate metta. And they are, of course, the vital foundations for other meditation practices, for our life basically. And if we want to do the Going for Refuge and Prostration practice effectively, we really need to have those foundations in place. So this practice does not replace, it's not a substitute for other meditation practices. You still do the mindfulness of breathing, you still do the metta bhavana, you intersperse those practices with just sitting, and then if you choose to, you can add this practice on top. So that's the first point. Foundations are vital. Secondly, I want to say something more about visualization. And really, I should put that in inverted commas, visualization. Because it's not necessarily a process of generating an internal image or picture in your mind. It can be, when we talk about visualization, when we talk about visualizing the tree of refuge and respect, it can be more of what we could describe as a feeling image. It can be a sense of something being present. So it doesn't have to be an internal picture. I know sometimes people say that they find it difficult to visualize. I'm not quite sure that that's always true, but I'm sure everybody can have some kind of sense of something being present to one. So it's not necessarily an internal image or picture. It can be this sense of presence. We do need to be familiar with what it is that we're visualizing or getting a sense of being in the presence of. So that's really important, that we become familiar with images, representations of the refuge tree, like the one behind me, and that we know where the different figures are, who the different figures are, and other qualities, characteristics of these figures. So you can study the tree of refuge and respect. There are books you can read about it. I would recommend Kulananda's book, Teachers of Enlightenment, which is all about doing this practice. And we also have Padmasagara booklets. Particularly I'd recommend this one by Arloka, which is the refuge tree as mythic context. So obviously that's going to take some time. You're going to need to put in some effort there, some study, to actually find out more about this particular image and start to develop connections with the different figures on the refuge tree. It will take time. It might take quite a long time, but you don't have to wait until you begin the practice. So do that alongside doing the practice. Don't try to study it and learn everything and then start doing the practice. You don't need to do that. And the reason you don't need to do that is because you've already got a connection with the refuge tree. And the reason you've already got a connection with the refuge tree is because you've already got a connection with the central image on this refuge tree behind me. You've already got a connection with the Buddha Shakyamuni. If you didn't have a connection with the Buddha Shakyamuni, you wouldn't be watching this video. Why are you watching this video if you don't have a connection with the Buddha Shakyamuni? It's what defines you in a way as a Buddhist. So you've already got a connection with the historical Buddha. Sangharakshita has described the Buddha Shakyamuni as the fountainhead of Buddhism. Everything else comes out of him. So all the other figures that we might be familiar with, all the other Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas, even the teachers of the past and the present, it's all coming out of the Buddha Shakyamuni's enlightenment. So all the figures on the refuge tree emerge out of the Buddha's enlightenment. So that could be in time and space. So the Buddha obviously taught the 5 arahants, the Dharma, communicated the content of his enlightened experience to others. They then passed it on. We've had all the teachers of the past who've learnt that Dharma, and the teachers of the present as well are part of that lineage, that great tradition. So the Buddha's enlightenment has spread through time and space in that way. And we, to whatever extent, whatever small an extent it might feel, we are in touch with that. We have a connection with that. So when we visualize the refuge tree, we are activating, we are developing, cultivating that connection. Not just time and space, but also the Buddha's enlightenment is elaborated upon, displayed in this image in archetypal terms, something trans-historical, something that goes beyond time and space altogether. So the other archetypal Buddhas, the Bodhisattvas, they're all manifestations of, crystallizations of, symbols of the great qualities of the Buddha's enlightenment that are in many ways unfathomable to us. So this image that we meditate upon, it gives us more of a tangible sense of the Buddha's enlightenment and makes it more mysterious at the same time. But as I've said, you already have a connection with that. You already have a connection with the Buddha in terms of space and time and history, and in terms of the archetypal, the transhistorical aspects of the Buddha's enlightenment, because you've got a connection already with the Buddha Shakyamuni. So if you find visualizing the refuge tree a challenge, difficult, and you're not sure where other figures are, you're not sure who they are, what they mean, what this is all about, just keep coming back to the roots. Keep coming back to that connection that you have with the historical Buddha, with the Buddha Shakyamuni. Start there, start with those existing feelings, and gradually you will develop that relationship. And it's a great journey. That's the great thing about doing this practice, is that you can roam around, explore the Buddha's enlightenment in all its different aspects, connect with different figures, see where your interest is, see where your fascination even is, or where it develops, where it arises as you explore this practice, this image over many months, many years, even many lifetimes. Another thing to say on visualization is that we're not just conjuring up the refuge tree in our minds as we see it on the image behind me here. We're not just developing a feeling either for the figures that we can see represented here. We're also, in the practice, visualizing ourselves surrounded by all of the sentient beings. So we visualize ourselves in relation to this. On our left, our mother and all women. On our right, our father and all men. And actually all people, all sentient beings whatsoever. In a sense, we're not just getting more of an understanding, more of a connection with what it is we're going for refuge to. We're also developing a sense of who and what we're going for refuge with. And ultimately, that's all life. Everyone, everything Everything has that impulse that I described at the beginning of this video of wanting to seek certainty, wanting to go beyond its limitations. And of course, Sangharakshita talked about this poetically as a specific level of going for refuge, the greatest possible level of going for refuge, which he calls the cosmic going for refuge. And he describes the cosmic going for refuge as the key to the mystery of existence itself. So we're tuning into that in the practice, not just by what it is we go for refuge to, but also the context within which we're going for refuge, the people, the life that we're going for refuge with. So that's a bit there about visualization in the practice. There will be an audio recording, an audio lead through of this practice that accompanies this video. So don't worry too much about remembering all this. It will also be in the audio that you can follow as you're doing the practice. So after visualizing the refuge tree and ourselves surrounded by all beings, we then start to recite 3 times a refuge verse or a refuge prayer. From now onwards, until the attainment of enlightenment, with great reverence of body, speech and mind, I go for refuge to the Buddha Shakyamuni. So we'll do that 3 times. And really what we're doing here is we're bringing in speech, but then we'll also bring in body. So as the verse says, with great reverence of body, speech and mind. This is why this is such a good practice, because it's total. It involves the whole of us. It's not just a meditation that we might assume is purely on the level of mind. We're also reciting this prayer, and we'll recite other verses as well. And then we move into the period of prostrations, which of course involves our whole body. So I'll say something now about prostrations. So I'm going to demonstrate to you how we do the prostrations. Before I do that, I just want to say a little bit about the attitude with which we prostrate. So let's remember that doing prostrations is an offering. So we're offering ourselves, we're offering our bodies, we're offering the whole of ourselves to the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. So we can do prostrations in that spirit and with that attitude. So sometimes we see people doing prostrations almost like a gym workout. You know, a lot of huffing and puffing, a lot of banging down quite heavily. We don't need to do it like that. We might not be able to help it in some cases, which is fair enough. But we don't enter into the prostrations with that kind of attitude or spirit that it's hard work and that we're really putting ourselves through some kind of spiritual boot camp. It's not like that. This is an opportunity to offer ourselves. So when we make an offering to a shrine, we do that with a certain care. We don't just throw a candle down onto the shrine. We place it very gently, very carefully. So we do it with an attitude of care, even an attitude of grace. So when we're doing prostrations, we can be graceful. We can offer ourselves gracefully to the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas. So that's the attitude. Another important element of doing the prostrations here is that we're also going to be reciting verses. So we're doing that out loud, and we're also doing it internally as well. So before we do a prostration, we all chant Om Ahung, to the best of all refuges I go. So Om Ahung, to the best of all refuges I go. We do that out loud, but then as we're doing a prostration, internally to ourselves, we're repeating to the Buddha for refuge I go, to the Dharma for refuge I go, to the Sangha for refuge I go. So we're always engaging our speech, we're always engaging our mind as we're moving our body. So Om Ahung, to the best of all refuges I go, out loud, internally to the Buddha for refuge I go, to the Dharma for refuge I go, to the Sangha for refuge I go. So there are 3 ways that we can do our prostrations, and they're all equally valid. You do whichever one you need to do. But we can do a full length prostration, we can do a kneeling prostration, or we can do a seated prostration. So in a moment I'm going to demonstrate these 3 different ways of doing prostrations to you. With the full length prostration, just to say a few words about that first, there are 2 different ways of doing that. It really depends what kind of floor you have at home. So if you've got a nice shiny wooden floor like we have at Padmasagara, you can do a sliding prostration. If you don't, doesn't matter, you can still do a second technique, which is to actually step out first and then place the body down and step back up again. So I'll show you both of those. I'll show you the kneeling and I'll show you a seated prostration as well. So first of all, I'll demonstrate the full length prostration in the sliding approach. So you'll see, you might be able to see on the camera there that I've got a pair of socks on my hands. You could also wear a pair of gloves, just anything that allows you to be able to slide. And 2 things to watch out for here. So first of all, the prostration goes forwards. It goes towards the Buddha and towards the refuge tree. Don't do 100,000 prostrations in the wrong direction. Sometimes you see people going backwards like that. We want to go that way. So the full length prostration goes like this. Om Ahum, to the best of all refuges I go. Om Ahum, to the best of all refuges I go. If you've got a floor that doesn't allow you to slide, the other way you can do the prostration is by stepping forward first. So in that case you would say, Om Ahum, to the best of all refuges I go. Om Ahum, to the best of all refuges I go. And you'll see here that I have a mat to protect the knees. That's very important. So do make sure that you don't injure yourself when doing the prostrations. So the second technique is to do a kneeling prostration. So just from a kneeling position, you're doing exactly the same thing. So Om Ahum, to the best of all refuges I go. And then, so as we go forward, the arms reach out, palms upwards, and then back over the head in a praying position, and then standing back up. So very easy, straightforward to do a prostration in the kneeling posture. And the third approach is to use a chair. So if you're meditating in a chair anyway, you can do your prostrations from a seated position. Depends on your physical fitness. It might be that all you can do is just bow, and that's fine. So Om Ahum, to the best of all refuges I go, and bowing. It might be that you want to add standing up into the equation. So Om Ahum, to the best of all refuges I go. Om Ahum, to the best of all refuges I go. So however you do the prostration, the main thing is you move something. Move the body. Get the body involved with the Going For Refuge and Prostration Practice. And don't forget the internal verse. So however you're moving, remember that you're also saying inside your own head, to the Buddha for refuge I go, to the Dharma for refuge I go, to the Sangha for refuge I go. Fifthly, we move into a period that we might describe as the purification phase of this practice. So we've done all those prostrations, we've prepared ourselves, we've opened ourselves up, you could say, to the adhisthana of the Buddha and the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, and we begin to experience light pouring down from the refuge tree, entering our body, filling us up, and this light dissolves all impurities, all negative karma in body, speech and mind, completely dissolves it and rids us of it, and instead fills us up with a sense of purity, of lightness, of joy. And with this stage, we really need to try to feel that. So it's not just something we are visualizing or seeing internally, or we've got to feel it actually in our body. We've got to feel it in our bones. So really trying to get a sense of being pure, because ultimately the tradition says that we are primordially pure. We've never been impure. So once we've experienced that purification, the light is drawn back into the body of the refuges, and then we'll gradually dissolve the refuge tree in the same order that we visualized it. So things begin to dissolve back into the body of the Buddha Shakyamuni. Eventually he himself dissolves into light, and then we're left with this vast, infinite blue sky. The blue sky fades away, and then we're just left sitting with the effects of the practice. At the very end, we transfer merits, so we recite the transference of merit and self-surrender. And of course, that is just reminding us that this hasn't just been for our own benefit, it's been for the benefit of all life, the benefit of all beings. So that's a quick run through then of the main stages of the practice. I hope it's communicated enough about the practicalities, but also something of the essence of the practice as well. And remember, there is the audio lead through, which you can listen to and join in with. And I would recommend that you do that many times, just so that you become very familiar with the structure of the practice, the stages of the practice, and then gradually you can begin to do things for yourselves, time things for yourselves. In terms of timings, you really need about 45 to 60 minutes to do a good period of this practice. That would give you, say, 15 minutes to do the main three stages. So 15 minutes to visualize the refuge tree, 15 minutes of prostrations, 15 minutes of purification and dissolving the image of the refuge tree. In terms of frequency, really you need to be looking at doing this practice for it to have an effect 3 times a week. It's negotiable. If you can't do 3 times a week, well, 2 times a week is good. If you can do more than 3 times a week, then do more than 3 times a week. If this was a daily practice, I'm sure you would see benefits very, very quickly. So I would just encourage you to take on this practice, do this practice as much as you possibly can, remembering that it's not a substitute for the other meditations that you will be doing alongside it. If at any point you want to talk about any of that in terms of how often to do it, or if you've got further questions about the practice, or if you want to tell us a little bit about how the practice is going for you, then do email the Ordination team. So you can email us on ordinationteam@padmaloka.org.uk. We'd be very happy to hear from you about how the prostration practice is going for you. I'm just going to say a few words to conclude about the benefits of this practice, just to give you a bit more encouragement, if you need it, to look at taking this practice on regularly. So firstly, I think it really, really will help you develop a sense of connection. So this is in 2 ways. So firstly, a sense of connection with order members and other mitras who've asked for ordination. So this is a key part of ordination training, this practice, and it has been for many years now, decades actually. So in taking on this practice, you are entering into that tradition. You're taking on a practice that many order members and many other mitras have done or have been doing for a very long time. So it does give you a sense of connection with the rest of the order and to some extent the whole movement. Not only that, it gives you a sense of connection in terms of lineage. So, as I've said, Sangharakshita, our own teacher, Bhante, is on this tree of refuge and respect, and is there with his 8 teachers. So we have a sense of the teachers that have gone before us. Of course, we've then got the teachers of the past as well, so a sense of connection across space and time, through the centuries, through the different parts of the Buddhist world. And of course, we go right the way back to the Buddha in this practice, so a sense of really being in the lineage of the Buddha. So connection develops through this practice in those different ways. Also, of course, it's the connection with the transcendental. So this is a great preparation, this practice, for taking on a sadhana. So at the time of ordination, you will be given the visualization and mantra recitation practice of a particular Buddha or Bodhisattva. So in doing this practice, you're actually preparing to take on that sadhana. You're getting familiar with the process of visualizing, how that works for you. Is it visual or is it more felt? You're getting to know yourself in this particular sphere of the imagination and a more imaginal approach to meditation. It might also be that through this practice, through meditating on different Buddhas and different Bodhisattvas, you begin to realize where your fascination is. Which of the Buddhas or Bodhisattvas is calling you, is taking your attention, is drawing you in, is picking you up. You can discover that through doing this practice. So why wait? Prepare for sadhana now. Make it a key part of your ordination training. Lastly, and this is the principal benefit, I think, of doing this practice. As I said right at the beginning of the video, what we really need to do is develop our capacity to go for refuge. And to do that, we need a clearer understanding of what going for refuge to the three jewels really means, what that is. We need an emotional connection with going for refuge to the three jewels, a heartfelt connection with going for refuge to the three jewels. And we need that strong volition so that no matter what, we will continue to go for refuge. However uncertain the world gets, however much things start to fall apart around us, we will be clear that it's going for refuge to the three jewels that is at the center of our lives. And this practice will give you a training in going for refuge to the three jewels. A very thorough training, because it's a training in body, in speech, and in mind. This practice will give you the key to the mystery of existence itself. So I hope that this video has been helpful, that you are willing, that you are excited even to take up the Going for Refuge and Prostration practice, and do listen to that audio recording and do the practice many, many times until the attainment of enlightenment even.